Today we're going to discuss the EOF error map method. I'm Justin Shaw and I'll be presenting. So geophysical fluid dynamics data sets come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. So here's one that clearly has lots of spatial information. Here's another, which is a in situ measurement of a very long Kelvin-Helmholtz billow train, and it's proceeding through time here. So actually, the only resolution in space is in the vertical. So you can see that this is very long because it wraps around to the next line over and over again. These things are giant billows, and so in this case, this is a set of time series, and so there's of course much more time information than there is spatial information. And here's another example from a CFD data set where you can see there's lots of small scale information here. This is the disturbance, and it's propagating in a large tank, of course, in a computational domain. Okay, so broadly then, we're going to divide geophysical fluid dynamics data sets into two types. In situ data sets, which are typically consisting of many more outputs than sensor locations, right? So you can see here that there's several sensors have been deployed, and they're going to sample time series, but of course that's not a lot of spatial information. Not a lot of spatial information, singular. We developed the gamma method for these data sets, and that's covered in another video and in a different paper. And the key here is that these are data sets consisting of time series, which as a data set, then you have a lot more time information than you have spatial information. And the gamma method finds time periods of interest in those cases, right? So times where you might want to focus your analysis. We want to do the same thing for CFD data sets. So here's another nice CFD data set output, and it clearly has lots of spatial information, but we're going to look for time periods of interest now in CFD data sets, and we need a different method than the gamma method. And in these cases, the data set is such that there is way more spatial information than there is time information. So we need a different method from the gamma method. Okay. So here's the tutorial example. This is a nice 2D run of a density profile and a wave propagating from left to right, as you see here. Okay, so I'll rewind it. You can see that there is a density jump right here. And as the wave propagates along, it hits that density jump, and it causes an instability in the front wave here. And you can see that around output 65, that the front wave really starts to break down and starts shedding material into the rear wave. And that is obviously something that would be of interest to us if we were studying this data set. Okay, so clearly in this case, the breakdown occurring from output 65 is of interest, as I said. And this is a moderate 2D run for tutorial purposes, meaning I can show you by visualization everything that's interesting about this data set. But we want a method that works even for large 3D runs, which are either difficult or too time consuming to visualize, right? We want some kind of method that very quickly identifies, hey, you might want to look at output 65 instead of visualizing the whole thing, which may be difficult or in some cases even impossible. Okay, so let's make a method, but first let's think about a more general outlook, right? Because, okay, in this case we had a density profile and a wave propagating and blah, blah, blah. But let's think more generally, because of course we want the model to be useful to as many data sets as possible. So any time index model output is typically going to include an influence from multiple processes. So for example, in our tutorial example, you have the wave propagating. That's obviously a process that's including some variance. Then you have the shedding of the core. That's going to be some other variance, a smaller amount of variance, right? So each process in the data set contributes a certain amount of variance to the overall total. We can then rank these processes by their variance contribution. And so we'll have, small, medium, and large variance contributions by these various processes. What does that look like? Well, by the extreme, we might have some large variance process would be something with a large amplitude over the entire time extent of the model output, and a small variance process might have a small amplitude and only last a little bit. Right? So medium versions, medium variance processes might be something that has a small amplitude but lasts the whole extent of the time output. But another example would be something that has a large amplitude and only lasts a little while, right? So some smaller subset than the entire time. And this type of thing is probably what we're looking for, because if it's medium variance for this reason, then we're going to have some kind of event. Clearly something is happening in a time-restricted sense within the model output, right? So this is probably something we would want to investigate in that data set. All right, so what do we want in a method? Continuing to think generally. Well, we want it to work. That much is obvious. Everybody wants their method to work. But also, we want people to use it. This seems like it should be obvious, but actually, it's not always obvious that that's the case, right? You can write something that works and then make no effort to make it usable, and not really care if other people use it, as long as they quote your paper or whatever. We want people to actually use it, okay? And given these two, that it should work and people should use it, people are more likely to use it if it's based on a standard method. That's just a social fact, okay? So it's a lot easier to bootstrap from something that is already well accepted by a wide range of communities. Well, the obvious standard method for discussing variance in a data set is empirical orthogonal functions, right? Also called EOF. Well, that's the short form for EOF, but also called SVD by anyone from a numerical background, certainly, or many people from a mathematical background. PCA by anyone from a statistical background, or perhaps engineering, and so on. Okay. When you do this, I won't get into it because, frankly, it's everywhere. But reminder that you end up with data at time t is the sum of these EOFs, which are the spatial information, along with the time coefficient at that time. This is the reconstruction. This is approximate because we're only taking the first d modes out of the possible, right? So not necessarily all the modes, but a certain amount of them. So a reconstruction of the data with the first d modes is written here. This would be the most variance you could have for that number of modes from 1 to d, because the modes are rank ordered by variance, right? So the more variance you have, the earlier you appear in the order. So in particular, EOF1 has the most variance, and so on. So the reconstruction is exact if d is the number of time steps. And so approximations look like this. So one might look at that and say, oh, well, the EOFs must correspond to the processes, right? Because we said that, well, the individual processes contribute a certain amount of variance. Obviously, these EOFs contribute a certain amount of variance. The EOFs and the processes must go hand in hand, right? They must be on a one-to-one basis. That is not true. So there has been some success correlating the first EOF to a physical process, right? So you have ENSO, NAO, AO. These are all examples, and they were great successes. However, EOFs are orthogonal, and physical processes are not in general orthogonal. So after the first EOF, there is no correspondence necessary, right? It doesn't really make sense that the physical processes would be orthogonal with one another. It is a mathematical, it's part of the mathematical construction, and it's very convenient mathematically. But after the first EOF, you expect no correspondence. So in general, every EOF added to a reconstruction contributes to multiple processes, not just one. Okay, and the first EOF is not necessarily going to be pure anyway. It captures the most variance. It doesn't care if that's from one or all processes. So no particular EOF in general should be considered to be corresponding exactly to any particular physical process. Okay, every EOF contributes to multiple processes. All right, so that's a lot of background. So here's the set of key observations. As more modes are added to the reconstruction, the approximation of multiple processes are simultaneously improved. The higher the variance of the process, the greater its priority. Okay. So the higher the variance of the process, the greater its priority, meaning the more variance a process contributes, the more likely it is to appear in the first or the second or the third EOF or all three, and so on. Okay, you're going to occur earlier in the sense of being included in higher ordered EOFs, higher ordered could be misconstrued there. The first EOF has the most variance, so if you the process with the most variance in the model output is likely to have contributions from the first EOF. Okay, so for a large number of modes, the reconstruction is nearly perfect. So at the other end, from D being very low, if you go D very high, it's nearly perfect, right? And everything that's being missed is noise. For a low number of modes, say just the first one or the second one or something, many processes are poorly approximated, right? So you go from a very poor approximation to an almost perfect approximation, as the number of modes, D, goes from 1 to the number of time steps. Well, that means that in between this terrible approximation and this excellent approximation, there will be, for some low and intermediate number of modes, these medium variance processes that we're interested in, they'll still be poorly approximated. Before you get to the perfect approximation, you'll have a poor approximation of those medium variance processes, right? Because the most or the highest variance processes will be contributed to first, and that will continue as you add more modes. And so for some low and intermediate number of modes, those medium variance processes are being missed because those modes, as they are added, are more concerned with the large variance processes. So here's what we're going to do. It's discrete, so we're going to construct a map of the error for every reconstruction at every time output and look for events as error anomalies. Why? Because those medium variance processes are the ones we're interested in. And if we look for high error in some intermediate number of modes, something's occurring. That's the point. Okay, so it's easy to say, but let's actually look at it. Okay, so here at the bottom is this error map construction. So we have in the vertical here, this is the number of modes D, and this is the infinity norm error of the reconstruction at every time. Okay, so at the bottom here, you have the one mode reconstruction that would run along the bottom here over time, and you can see that the error is quite high for a one mode reconstruction. But since there are 100 time outputs, there are 100 choices for D, and we're going to look at each of them. So up here we'd have the 25 mode reconstruction, and you follow a straight line across here. That would be the 25 mode reconstruction over all of the 100 time outputs in order. And so when we do this, we end up with the infinity norm error of these reconstructions over the entire time, and we can see all the error at once. And then we're going to look for error anomalies over time. So let's look at what this does. Okay, so it's propagating along, and on the reminder here, this is the XZ domain. So this is all spatial. This is one time output, and I've keyed the time output up here to this green set of vertical bars to tell you what time it is. Okay, so time output 1, 5, and so on, and we're going through here, and you can see the propagation, and there's not much change in the error structure as we propagate along. And indeed, as we hit the difference in the density field here, still not too much happening, but you can see that it's starting to break down a little bit. And what your eye is drawn to is actually this right here, this error anomaly. And sure enough, right around time 65, and as the shedding continues, this error anomaly in the error map shows a difference, right? So just imagine now that, just imagine that you did not have this top animation, and all that you were given by was the error map, which is easy to do. It runs at the end of our simulations. when we do our CFD runs now, we get this out at the bottom here as part of the output, right? So we get the time index model output and we get this map. So before any visualization is done, you can come along and look at this map and say, something's happening right here, clearly. Okay? So you can come across here and say, all right, well, instead of visualizing the whole thing, I'm just going to visualize from I'm going to pick 65 and 75 and 85 and see what's going on. And if you did that, you'd get this, this, and this. And you'd have a really good idea of what was without having to analyze the visualization of the entire model output, which is very important. Okay, so this is a big time savings for us. All right, so in summary, error maps identify time periods of interest in CFD data sets which are worthy of further study. It's computationally inexpensive and it's easy to implement because it's one SVD or singular value decomposition, a reconstruction for each time step, and one norm calculation per time step. It's not bad at all. Okay? The method is data-driven and can be applied to any time index model output, right? You need a time index, so this doesn't make sense. Can't find time periods of interest if there's no time. But that said, model output that is time indexed, it's good. We have tested our current code for the method on data sets up to 10 to the 9 bytes with 81 outputs, and it worked great. The gamma method and the error map method together allow the identification of features in many geophysically sourced data sets. Right, so we had the gamma method for time index model output, we have the gamma method for time series data sets, and now we have the EOF error map method for time index model output, and both methods solve the same problem in their respective data sets, which is to find time periods of interest that are worthy of further study. Thanks for watching.